Somebody's ready and excited.
Oh.
Blaine, we can get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Blaine Rushak. I'm the president of the PhD Project, and I'm extremely excited to welcome you to our third webinar series on state of inclusion, diversity, and equity in business. We have an amazing conversation today. If you haven't joined us for the last two conversations, they're available for replay, but I know today you're going to be very excited. Our pre-meeting was very fun. I think you're going to have a great time with our amazing women today. So with no further ado, I'd like to just quickly discuss the PhD project. For those that are not familiar with it, it was started 26 years ago. And I don't want to age myself, but I will share that my undergraduate and graduate education, I went to 3 different universities and had not one faculty of color, which is really unfortunate. And I look back and say, what an experience I missed out on. But the PhD project was trying to tackle that exact problem. And so 26 years ago, there were less than 300 faculty of color in US accredited business schools. And today, with the help of the PhD project support, there are close to 1,400 active faculty and close to 300 students in progress. So we have really made inroads into trying to change the face of academia to hopefully attract more diverse students to the business world and give corporate America those leaders that they're looking for, to move up in the corporate ranks, make changes in our society, as well as selfishly hopeful that some of them will choose to someday get their PhD and go full circle and become a professor and mentor and be role model for students as well. We really do believe that change in the classroom will change the face of diversity in business. I will say that our friends in the PhD project, our family and friends, have been making an impact not only on their campuses, but in their communities and doing things like today's webinars. We're really excited to have our panelists today. If anybody after today's session is thinking, wow, I'd love to get a PhD, I think that would be an amazing next career for me. Please go to our website. We have a November conference where you can come and learn about getting a PhD. Or if you work for an organization that says, I think we want to be connected to the PhD project, I think that is an initiative that we really want to be involved with. Once again, go to our website, phdproject.com.org, and you'll learn more about it. And we'd be happy to talk to you about becoming a sponsor of the PhD project. So with no further ado, because we have an amazing panel of some amazing women, I'm going to turn it over to Sasha Thompson, who is the founder of the Equity Equation. She does an amazing job of moderating. And so, Sasha, I'm going to turn over to you and these amazing women.
Thank you so much, Blaine. Good evening, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you all this evening. I am just going to really jump into this. We have amazing panelists. We have one more that's on the way. So we're going to pull her into the conversation once she comes on stage. But I want to do some quick introductions before we start. So our first panelist is Rosanna Duruthi. She is LinkedIn's head of global diversity, inclusion, and belonging. She brings broad cross-functional human resources leadership experience in attracting and developing high-performing talent as a diversity leader at companies like Cigna, Bendini, Universal, and Merrill Lynch. At LinkedIn, Rosanna's focus is on empowering all employees, members, and customers to realize their full potential. With Rosanna's leadership, LinkedIn aims to continue to build on its strong culture that values diversity, inclusion, and creating a sense of belonging for all employees. In addition to her role at LinkedIn, Rosanna is also a member of the Business Advisory Council of the Human Rights Campaign, where she provides expertise and counsel on LGBTQ workplace issues. She has been recognized as one of the country's leading professional Hispanic women and an influential mind in the diversity and inclusion space. Welcome, 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 Rosanna. Our next panelist has just joined us, Dr. Tina Opie.
My apologies.
That's okay. Tina is an associate professor in the management division of Babson College, teaching organizational behavior courses to undergraduates and MBA students. Professor Opie obtained her PhD in management in May 2010 from the New York University Stern School of Business. In 1999, she obtained her MBA from the Darden School of Business. Professor Opie's research focuses primarily on how organizations can create workplaces that successfully leverage individual difference and convey respect for individual contributions. Prior to her academic career, Professor Opie was a banker and a management consultant. Welcome, welcome. Our next panelist is Deborah Langford. Deborah Langford is an executive director, business development, and head of community development for Advancing Black Pathways, the bold new JP Morgan Chase initiative powered by the global breadth of the firm to make our economy work for more people. Deborah is nationally recognized for her expertise as a strategic networking leader and creator of successful outcomes in diversity initiatives. Prior to joining JP Morgan Chase & Company, Deborah spent 5 years leading diversity initiatives at the USC Marshall School of Business. She was the corporate VP of Inclusion and Business Diversity at NBC Universal and the VP of Strategic Sourcing at Time Warner, where she placed over 100 diverse executives in senior positions. In 2011, President Barack Obama appointed Deborah to the USO Board of Governors. And in 2017, California Governor Edmund Gerald Brown Jr. appointed Deborah to the California Film Commission, where she currently serves. Welcome, Deborah. And last but certainly not least, Pia Wilson-Body. Pia Wilson-Body is the executive director of Intel Foundation, where she oversees the foundation's approach for achieving impact and realizing the organization's mission and goals. As a part of her role, she is responsible for the Intel International Science and Engineering Fair, the largest and most admired competition of its type in the world. Pia also heads the Corporate Responsibility Group in US and Latin America and plays a key role in shaping the K-12 strategic initiatives. Before joining Intel's foundation in 2015, Pia served as Director for Global Diversity External Relations and increased Intel's thought leadership by formulating a first-in-class diversity and technology awareness campaign encompassing traditional and social media, editorial content, earned speaking events, and several awards for the company. A 12-year Intel veteran, Wilson-Body has held various leadership positions in corporate affairs, foundation management, global diversity and inclusion, human resources, workforce development, and communications. Wilson-Body held similar management positions in the automotive industry, in addition to business operations, corporate sales, finance, and international human resources. I don't know about you all, but this is a phenomenal group of ladies. And I am honored to have this conversation with you. So if you are ready to start, let's dive right in. Yes, okay. So we are halfway through Women's History Month. And, it's interesting because I'm noticing that this year feels a little bit different than it's felt in the past. I don't know if it's because of the pandemic, and we've seen the impact of that on particularly women over the last year. But then we also have racial unrest that has been percolating for the last few years, especially over the last few months after the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and now, everything happening in the Asian community. And so I'm noticing that women of color are starting to be more vocal and speak up about their experiences and really talking about, how what they're experiencing can be different than some of their colleagues. And so what I'm noticing again is this changing of the narrative. So Pia, I noticed, that I'm seeing more of this, and I'm hearing it being tied to imposter syndrome and, so many other things, that the buzzwords that we're hearing right now. Yeah. Can you tell us your thoughts on why it's important for us to share our stories, the valleys and the mountaintop moments, and why do we need to do that with each other?
Yeah, so thank you, Sasha, and thank you for the warm introduction. When you ask me that question, I'm reminded of this quote, and I don't know if you've heard this before, but I'll share it anyway. Tell the story of the mountain you climbed, because your words could be a page in someone else's survival guide. So I've journaled for 40 plus years, capturing kind of the ebbs, the flows, the ups, downs, as well as my struggles with my career or just life events. Being a mom of now adult sons, being a wife, as well as a daughter. So I've captured that for 40 years. But in June, I decided to share one of my journal entries on social media. It took a lot of courage to press that button to post my intimate thoughts, but I did it. And I shared the complexities and the struggles of being a Black leader and a Black mom in the wake of George Floyd's death. What I didn't realize, the impact of me sharing. A male colleague of mine reached out and he said, Pia, I just didn't know or have a clue of what it is to be in your shoes. And I also was pinged by many women who said, thank you for telling your story, right? I think we show up, whether it's on Zoom or for some of us in the office, tight and right, as I like to say. And we do not share the sacrifices or the trade-offs or the choices we make to be, fill in the blank, right? And what I've come to recognize is our story, your stories, may be that medicine that the world needs. Yet so many of us leave our stories untold. And I read a piece. So when you ask me about the importance, let me tell you, I read a piece in Psychology Today that said, every time you tell your story and someone bears witness to it, you turn off the body's stress responses and it relaxes the nervous system. So when you talk about telling a story, that's one advantage. The other, which is what I consider equally important, is giving voice to your story, because it allows others to empathize and for them to know that they are not alone. So as I kind of look around our Zoom roundtable at Deb, at Rosanna, Tina, we all have lived experiences that need to be shared. And it is my hope that our words or even our pearls of wisdom will be uplifting and inspiring and really kind of spark action today. But it all begins with us giving voice to our shared experience.
Thank you for that, Pia. It's interesting because I actually just recently shared part of my story in the New York Times. And can I tell you the number of people that have reached out, women that have reached out saying exactly that, right? Thank you for sharing your story, because that's my story. Right. And so many, either saying, I thought I was the only one, right? I thought it was just me, or, oh, okay. Whew, there's a sense of relief, even though it's not necessarily the greatest story. It's a sense of relief knowing you're not the only. And so, Tina, when we spoke about it, you talked about the muscles that women of color have to build, like we naturally build, because we are navigating some of these corporate or academic waters. So can you talk to us a little bit about that and how that is almost like a blessing and a curse, right?
Yes, thank you so much for this panel. And I have to say, so I'm a working mom. I was late because I was making some shrimp pasta. And it has to get into, I need to chill it so that we can have dinner. We have dinner at 6 o'clock as a family. So my apologies, but honestly, it's like, sorry, not sorry. I got to take care of my family. So
that's what we do.
Sasha, thank you for that. And hello to Pia and Deb and Rosanna. In terms of the muscle that you're asking about, Sasha, so I have been known to say that You know, when we think about some of the adversity that we confront as women of color, and I can speak specifically for myself as a Black woman, many of us, and as Black women, many of us have had to learn how to navigate sometimes unfriendly, sometimes even hostile workplaces. And as a result of that, we've had to learn how to read a room quickly. We've had to learn how to develop allies before that may have even been a common word, because we know that if we go into the conference room alone, we're much less likely to be successful. So I refer to those sort of as muscles, and I get a lot of pushback. So people are saying, wait a minute, you mean to tell me just because you're Black and you're a woman, you have muscles? Well, yes, I do. So it's sort of similar to salmon that have to swim upstream to mate. We perfectly buy into the idea that a salmon will have different strength in its fins and in its body and even in its cognition, because it has to do something that's different than other fish. So why is it so hard to believe that if you have leadership dilemmas in your organization that might require a unique perspective, Black women, women of color may be exactly the kind of people who you want to address that, because we've had to develop additional muscle that, yes, some others have not had to develop. So I think that, and connecting that back to your question about storytelling, you know, storytelling and that conversation about muscle, storytelling is powerful because it's a narrative. It's our unique as well as connective narratives. Unique in the sense that we want to present our voices because oftentimes they may have been excluded or missing, but connective in that we're not the only ones. There are similarities in our experiences. And so storytelling is really part of the human experience, from griots, you know, back in the African diaspora to storytellers right now. So I really think it's important for us to want to appreciate the unique experiences we have and also remember how they connect us.
Oh, thank you for that, Tina. You know, so as I'm listening and thinking about some of the conversations that we had in preparation for this, you know, one of the catchphrases, I guess, for lack of a better term, that, you know, I'm hearing is they want organizations, regardless if it's corporate or academic, you know, want us to bring our full selves, right? We'll be our authentic selves. And there's a part of me, a big part of me, that's like, you really don't want that. Like, you don't know what you're really asking for if you want us to bring our full selves. And so part of that really requires a fundamental mind shift of leaders, right? Because I think there's this professional conversation or definition or box, right? That they want us to be our authentic selves that fit in that box. But that's not our authentic selves, right? And so you're really now pushing back on leaders to be more inclusive, to get rid of this box. And so, Roseanne, I want to talk to you about, you know, how can organizations or institutions start thinking about inclusive leadership, and especially around us bringing our full selves to them?
Yeah, we're in a really unique moment if you think about it, because that was a conceptual thought a year ago, this idea of authenticity and bringing yourself to work. And now it turns out that work is in our homes. And so I appreciate what Tina is doing, because that's how so many of us are living our lives. But I think really to index upon that point, there's also a real change in society today. There is certainly a generation that's coming into the workforce that has no desire to be put in a box, whether it's the box of identity or the box of pretense or having to be something that they're not. And what's really fascinating about it is this idea that there was a time, and for some there's still this space where we have to be avatars in our own lives. Like, you know, we step over that threshold in the morning. In the days when we used to walk into an office, we had to leave our lives outside the door and become whatever role it was that we were performing for the organization. And that is what people knew about us, the job that we did. In many ways, becoming like the furniture, a commodity, not known for our aspirations, not known for our dreams, not known for stepping over that threshold at the end of the day. and being the superheroes in our own lives, whether we're the big sisters and mentors to others, or we might be that individual in the family who is caregiving for a parent, or is leading the PTA, or is championing that niece or nephew because we want them to have access to the insights that we didn't have benefit to have when we were beginning our careers. And so, this power around authentically being ourselves is really about unlocking all of that discretionary talent that in our lives as women of color exists from our lived experience, not just the job. And when we think about the power of that in the work environment, it certainly serves for not only greater inspiration, when we don't have to arm ourselves to lock our dreams and the things that matter to us up in order to go to work. But for those intelligent leaders, those emotionally intelligent leaders who recognize that an individual's authentic self also unlocks this amazing discretionary talent and power of perspective and insights and creativity, and the ability to bring a voice that will share intelligence that can't be attained through textbooks, can't be attained through a standard corporate environment. And that speaks to a world of customers, and it speaks to the world of products that are being developed. It speaks to the world of, not having to guard that emotional real estate that's about pretending I am not the person I am in order for you to feel comfortable with who I am. And so a lot about that really points us to the workforce of the future, what it's going to require for a leader to be effective in having a high performance team. Because the reality is that workforce is looking more and more different and more diverse. It's less likely that the individual who's in that workforce is going to be, the boy next door, or, my golf buddy's child. But in fact, it's going to be someone who comes from a different upbringing or different background, or maybe they went to community college before they got their 4-year degree, as opposed to going to the same schools that many leaders have gone to. And in that process, what really has been proven, and there's research that points to this, is that diverse teams outperform not merely because they're diverse. In reality, there's equal potential for those teams to underperform against their, normative, homogeneous teams. What unlocks the potential and the performance in creativity is actually the capacity of a manager or people leader to recognize those differences, and much like the conductor of an orchestra, be able to harmonize and allow individuals to be themselves and contribute that body of knowledge and insight and perspective and experience, and to do it enthusiastically, so much so that what you and I bring to work is the best of ourselves, not that small part of ourselves that we feel is welcomed while all the rest has to be guarded. And so that ability to go beyond managing to the lowest common denominator is an artifact of the past. If you want to be a successful leader, whoever you are, you have to be able to meet people where they are. You have to be able to earn their trust. You have to be able to see their potential and then help them realize it and recognize it may be different from what your potential was. It may be different from how you speak or how you relate to the world. It may be more communal in nature than the very individualistic Western world we've been raised in. But at the end of the day, those talents, when operating in unison with other people's talents, is really a lot like alchemy. It's the ability to create something more, something greater, something powerful and magical. And that doesn't happen when you treat people the same. It doesn't happen when you're managing to the level of comfort I as a leader has. It's the ability to stretch beyond your comfort to help people realize and bring forth that which makes them amazing. And I think that's where authenticity really is a gold mine for companies, to be more than to create more powerfully and to engender trust and loyalty where that may not always exist in our workforce today.
Thank you so much. That, oh my gosh, there was just so many nuggets in that, and I love it. I love it. But one of the things that, as you were talking, and there's definitely an onus that's on the leader, right, to ensure that there's this inclusion and psychological safety, talk about a lot about that lately, is there, right? You can't just expect people to come in and do the job, to what you're saying. But the flip side of that is we're often one of the onlys, right? We're sometimes it's a very lonely place. And so Deb, I want to, circle to you on this. And again, you, like so many of our panelists, have seen it from the corporate and the academic side of things. But can you talk to us a little bit about the importance of community and the importance of, a support structure when we are some of the onlys?
Sure. Let me start with saying how excited I am to be on this panel with these amazing women. This is awesome, especially as you opened it up to be halfway through Women's History Month. And I also want to say it's also sobering, right, that we know in a mass killing that 6 of the women were women of color and Asian women. Mm-hmm. And so that's sobering for everyone. And I think that it reminds me that we all have the power to show and demonstrate solidarity. And I've been looking on Instagram and Twitter and been seeing some signs and some messages, and I've liked them. But I even realized as we started, did I make a statement? And I know that right after this, even with the busy schedule, I need to demonstrate it, right? I know I have it in my actions, but I want to go in and demonstrate it. I have a dear friend, Patty Rockenwagner, who is a phenomenal restaurateur, and she and her husband Hans are quite successful. And I remember when there were many events, even in a pandemic, when restaurants were asked to do things to support Black Lives Matter. And I remember Patty Rockenwagner Bakery, doing something around pies or something, and she did it. And I went, in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle when you've lost all this business, you, Patty Rockenwagner, who happens not to be African-American, is making certain that your business is saying, we not only have the sign in the window, we action it. And so I share that because it's on my heart. And I think that it's an example of how we have the ability to make a change and make differences, right? We are all quite fortunate to work in leading companies, right? I am thrilled to be at JP Morgan Chase, and where Jamie Dimon put out a message yesterday, enough is enough, about what's going on right now in the country with regard to the targeting of Asians. When we talk about women, we have an organization called Women on the Move, right? It is a global organization led by and started by some of our C-level women. And it is absolutely fantastic as programming for internal women as well as for our external clients. But it's not the only thing we do for women. There's over a dozen organizations across all of our lines of businesses that are focused on women. So we talked about, Sasha, in our conversation, that when you're in these organizations, let's say corporate, right, you've got the ability to have resource groups that you join, you support, you engage, right? And I think that's incredibly important. I can't think of one company now that we would call a leading company that doesn't have some very specific BRGs, right? I know that to be true. So I think there's that part of it. But what I was sharing with you, because I do have a unique background, I've been a media and entertainment executive for 25 years, as you were talking about our stories. I certainly can appreciate that with regards to the importance of the narrative, right? And now so I was media and entertainment, and now I found myself in banking, and in the middle, I was in academia. And so what I realized is that I was in a brand new space, even though I was an alum of USC. I had no idea about academia or being at a business school. And what I didn't find there, I was able to have external, right? And so there was a group that had already been started before me, and it was the Association of Business School Diversity and Inclusion Officers. And we decided to restart it because we were all seeing each other. It's not exclusive to academia. We all go to some of these same conferences, right? Whatever industry you're in, right? And we're all not going to share the real competitive information. But when you see someone, you realize that if you all came together, we could really make difference across the entire industry. And so from Colleen to Taryn, Lina, and Jamie, these were my go-to girls, right? we would say, this is what's going on in the campus, this is what's going on in the school, these are the challenges. How are you doing it so that I can take it back to Marshall and say, well, Carnegie Mellon is doing this. Well, Cornell said that this is the answer to their problem, right? And there were times when I could say, and this is what Marshall was doing. And so I share that to say to the women, if it's not already in your own environment, sometimes you can find what you're looking for in the support that you need, external to your environment, but within your industry, right? And yet, when you're in your environment, figure out how you can be the change, right? I think that one of the things that we've got the opportunity to do is to really harness the experiences of all women, right? I am sure I'm not unique in that when you bring up something that perhaps you're looking at numbers, you've disaggregated the data, and you said, oh, well, maybe we're pretty good in terms of diversity. But when we disaggregate that data, wow, we realize that there's this group, we need to lean in a little bit more. And what I found in my experience in academia was that when I brought it up, it was just me noticing something, and it wasn't universally welcomed. It was like, it wasn't like everybody championing around, wow, this number is low or this number is low. And so I think that I want to share with the audience that can you imagine if we all came together as women, and included our allies and men, of course, but this is a women's conversation, so I'm going to stay in with women. Can you imagine what could happen is if each group cared as much about the other group? We would change everything, right? And my experience at USC was wonderful. I appreciated it immensely. And what I realized was that I needed to be the change, right? And so again, if I didn't see it immediately, what I could also do, we had 19 schools across campus, right? And so what I didn't know about academia, I could find out from others. And that's actually how I got introduced to the PhD project, right? Was being at USC. So I'm quite thrilled about the experience. But I also want to say, because I was in academia for 5 years, Blake started it off, right? Saying that when the PhD project started, there were 300 faculty of color. And now because of the PhD project, there's over 1,400. I want to lean in about that, about the faculty of color, because I think it aligns with what everyone has said about leadership. My point of view is, if you don't have faculty of color in these schools, and let's say specifically in some of the business schools, let's say business law engineering, because oftentimes that's the groups that are going into corporate America and rising to the top. I don't think it is only that it's a disservice to the diverse student who doesn't see the faculty member that looks like them. I think it's a disservice and a loss, and an opportunity loss for all the students. Because how could the non-diverse male student who has never had the experience of a diverse female faculty member, a diverse male faculty member, how can they go into LinkedIn or Intel or JP Morgan Chase, where we have C-level diverse female executives and C-level diverse male executives, and be comfortable in this reporting relationship? Because they've never seen it, because they've never had to do it. And so that's why I think that this is an ecosystem discussion, right? That we need to get it right in academia, certainly in all levels, I would say, but let's say college, because that's where, you are really kind of defining where you're going to go work. But if we could really lean in and say, how do we look into those worlds? And as companies, maybe say, when we're asking for the data on the students, maybe I'll ask for the data on the faculty. Right? And then realize that when we want somebody to come into our leading organizations, that they are familiar with diversity. They understand why it's important. They have answered to someone who's diverse. They've looked to the left, looked to the right, to the front, to the back. They've been in clubs with people who are diverse. That's going to make them come into these organizations and be great leaders, right? And so that's why I was excited to join this conversation, that I think that building communities and relationships are really key, and that we as women know that we've got a lot of opportunity to not just, click a like, but make a statement.
Love it. Love it. And it tied right into what Rosanna was saying, right, around inclusive leadership and just this, we have to change that mindset. And again, yes, it is a pipeline issue, but where does that pipeline really begin? and that's that classroom. So thank you for that. Pia, I want to stick with community with you as well too, because when we spoke, you were talking about how community shows up differently for different people. And for some that's their family, some that's their colleagues. So talk about the importance of that and how that's kind of helped you on your journey, but how we as women of color can really lean into understanding how we can use community to support us.
Yeah, Rosanna kind of highlighted the importance of support as well as Deb. But Sasha, where I want to lean is the support of informal sponsors. Those sponsors have helped to advance my career. I've had 3 sponsors in my lifetime, or the lifetime of my career, I should say, and all were instrumental in propelling my career. They saw something that I did not see in myself. And these folks wore the t-shirt, the Pia written across. They pushed me, they guided me, they guided my career and provided me with opportunities, quite frankly, to spread my wings. But I'm going to park my thoughts on my first sponsor, which we talked about, and his name was Danny McCarthy. And it's true story. When I graduated from Spelman, I joined Chrysler, a management training program, with the expectation that I would lead a department after 18 months of my rotation. So fast forward, finished the program. I was so excited for my first management assignment. I showed up in my blue suit, shoulder pads. I'm kind of aging myself, ready to conquer the day. And the branch manager said, now this was day 1, "Hey, Pia, can I talk to you?" And you know how you get that feeling. By his tone, my gut told me something was askew. He said, "We've had a slight change, a restructuring, and you'll still be a manager, but managing a different team. In essence, I would be managing a smaller team, a more of a junior role." What I learned, in the thread was that I was being given the junior management role because a white male colleague threatened to quit the company if he did not get that senior role with the larger team. And as you can imagine, I was disappointed, angry. To be honest, I was thinking about suing, ready to quit, all of that. Well, here comes Danny. Danny, who had witnessed the injustice and he sensed my disappointment, he took me to the side, and this is in a day where he could probably say this, "Kiddo, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about the job, and so you will be ready for the next opportunity. So don't worry." And he told me, and as if he was reading my mind, "Don't quit." Danny held true to his word. He taught me the ins and outs of the business, gave me cover when I slipped, when I made a mistake, and he spoke well of me, among my peers, leaders, and colleagues in the office. So me taking that junior role was actually a blessing in disguise, because I think it set me up for my current role as president of the Intel Foundation. Since I did not have to manage those, the bigger team, if you will, I had time to redirect my energy to get involved in the community. While I was in Cleveland, I joined numerous organizations, youth advisory boards, mentoring networks, worked on political campaigns. And before I knew it, I was representing some of those organizations on TV, radio, and in the press. My work in the community got the attention of Chrysler headquarters in Detroit. And next picture show, I was offered a new opportunity, and I was ready for it. So two things, and I'll close on this. Number one, I attribute a lot to that sponsor, Danny, for wearing, the PIA t-shirt, pouring into me. And it helped me to position for that larger role. Matter of fact, I leapfrogged the other manager. And what I did not share early on is Danny actually worked for me. But he was an influencer in the office, even though he was on the tail end of his career. And if life doesn't come full circle, a year later, that same office had to come to me for their approval of their business deals. And then the second thing I will say, just redirecting my energy to something positive. Like I said, I was angry, that negative energy, but I put it towards something positive and put it in the community. And what I initially thought was a setback was really a setup for the work that I'm doing today. So
Yeah.
sponsors are very, very important.
And I think when we spoke about it, I told you, my mom has always said to me, she's like, you're so worried about the door that God is closing that you're not seeing that window that he opened, right? And so it's like making sure that you are looking at all opportunities. You never know where it's going to come from. So thank you. And I'm just reading the chat, and people are just inspired by that story, because we never know who our sponsors are going to be. Right. And I think that's the beauty of sponsorship and the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. And one of the statistics, I believe it was out of Catalyst, I can't remember where it was from, said, women of color are over mentored and under sponsored. Right. And so thinking about that and switching to, who do you sponsor or who does the sponsoring? Right. And making sure that it may not always look like us either, to your point, Pia. So I want to do a quick pivot, and I'm also being mindful of the time. We've talked about this a little bit, and we've talked about, being the only in the numbers, right? And disaggregating the data. And because they love to pull all that data together and like, look, see, we're doing great. No, we're not. So let's really be true about what's happening here. So Tina, when we were speaking about it, we were talking about, the conversation of, well, we want to make sure that it's fair for everyone, right? We don't want to leave anybody out. And there's this balance between equity and equality. So can you talk to me a little bit about that and some of the challenges that come up when we have that zero-sum mindset?
Yes, thank you so much. That is such an important conversation. And so I am the co-chair of Babson's, the Dean of the College Inclusive Excellence Committee. And I bring that up because in that capacity, we are talking about everything from recruiting to training to promotion, et cetera. And we have to decide, and I have to decide as a leader, what we emphasize. You can imagine I have been talking quite a bit. When you say we like to aggregate the numbers, many organizations say, oh, we're awesome. And then I said, well, can we look at the domestic diversity? How many Black folks, Latinx folks, Indigenous folks from the United States do we have on the faculty? Oh, I think there are less than 10 of us, 10 Black faculty who, period. And I think there are 8 of us who are on the tenure track. And this is not to embarrass Babson College, because I think honestly, those statistics are very similar across institutions, corporations, nonprofits, baseball teams. I mean, no, not there actually. but one of the conversations that comes up is, Tina, Dr. Opie, race is not the only thing. And I said, but race is the canary in the coal mine. Because if you address some of the issues and challenges and inequities that I have confronted as a Black woman academic, you're going to actually benefit the white women, the white men, the entire community, and the institution writ large. Because some of the issues that I have raised and I've experienced, I then began to look at building a coalition And I talked to people who were different than me and found out, wait a minute, they're having some of the same experiences. It's not exactly the same as what I'm having as a Black woman,
Yeah.
but there was power in getting them to recognize, by addressing some of the unique challenges that I confronted as a Black woman, it actually benefited the entire community, And so this tension between equity and equality, we're not looking for the exact same thing. But I do want to know that if I'm putting in 8 hours worth of work, and my colleague who is from a different group, a demographic group, is putting in 8 hours worth of work, that we're going to get the same output and roughly the same output. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it's inputs and outputs. That ratio needs to be similar. That's a lot of what equity is about. Okay, and we know in workplaces that women of color in particular are paid much less than white women and than white men.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to get uncomfortable enough with that to actually act upon it. As Deb said, we need to stop reporting statistics and start changing statistics. If we wanted to, I've said this before, in 6 months, organizations could be drastically different. But I think we're very uncomfortable saying things like, okay, in 6 months, I want there to be more Black faculty. I want there to be more Latinx directors. Oh my gosh, isn't that a quota? You know what? We're not going to even deal with that. Let's make sure that we're representative of the general population. That is a, what is the word called? It's a trap. It's a fake argument that people use because they're trying to make it a zero-sum game. Heather McGhee's book is awesome, where she talks about this. I'm reading some of that book. We have to recognize that when you benefit the organization by pursuing equity, you're benefiting everyone so that the pie is enlarged as a result.
Yeah. It's the curb cut, right?
Yeah. But I'm really, I'm pushing organizations. Don't keep talking about me about the process. And I think Ibram Kendi says, if you have racially disparate outcomes, then racism is embedded in the process. It is up to you. If you're a leader, if you are a strategic thinker, then why can't you figure out what's embedded in the process? We've been looking at some of the same issues. People like Bernie Milano and Myrna Vanner and Tara Perino and Christine Pazos and Marie Zara. I'm giving DAP to the PhD project because they have I'm a result of the PhD project. Yeah. I'm in front of the classroom as a result of the PhD project. And if the PhD project can do this, why aren't other organizations coming to them and paying the PhD project to help them understand the same model? Because it doesn't make any sense. If we had the will, in 6 to 12 months, we could significantly change the face of corporate America, the face of academia. But we have to have the will and we have to avoid those fake arguments.
Love it. Love it. Rosanna.
Yes, ma'am.
So, we did touch on this a little bit. And, you talked about there's just a lack, again, it's the fear, right? Their lack of skills in this space. We have not built, as we were talking about earlier, the muscle to have a lot of these conversations to begin with. And so, can you share with us, some of your thoughts around what we can do, and not necessarily us, right? Because I'm also one of those folks that believes, don't put this all on the marginalized people. This ain't our problem. You do your own work. So, what can these corporations and institutions do to build that muscle so that we don't have to have these conversations again a year from now?
Yeah, there's a lot they can do. And I think first of all, it just begins with how they approach any objective they have as a business. First of all, if they don't take this seriously as a business imperative, it won't get done. You hear how any people manager or leader talks about their business objectives and their goals and what they're accomplishing and what happens when they don't make their numbers or when they don't hit their objectives. This is no different. And it's not about quotas. It's effectively about how we're creating pipelines, funnels, opportunities, and realizing the talent in the work environment. So one, it's got to be discussed with the same parameters and intentionality with which we discuss the business plan, the business strategy, and the intended business outcomes. Second, once that's set, the expectations, clearly the education, because we really have not had an avenue for people to learn to behave differently. What I mean by behave differently is to exercise cultural humility, to bring curiosity to people's differences rather than bringing their judgments to those differences. And to recognizing that as we go forward, leaders not only have to embody inclusive skill sets in order for businesses to recognize the productivity of their workforce, but they're going to have to do some things differently. An example would be if, as a leader, my network looks exactly like me, I'm a liability to the organization. I'm a liability to the organization because in reality, I don't have the reach, the understanding, the capacity to deal with differences effectively. So one of the things that I do with managers, because this could be a really triggering conversation. No one wants to hear they have the wrong network. And in reality, we don't have wrong networks. Our networks are what they are. We may have network insufficiency. It's insufficient for what I'm up to as a professional or as a leader. And what I have leaders do is think about if they're married, think about who was on their wedding invite list. And if they're not married, think about who they would be inviting to their wedding invite list. I can be assured that each of us have probably been individuals who've attended some wedding which had one table of all those other people because everyone else in the room looked just like the people up at the altar. But those networks and research, PRI did research back in 2016 that showed, for most white people, for 94% of white people, their networks are entirely white. For 83% of Black people, their networks are entirely Black. And for 64% of Latinos, their networks are entirely Latino, recognizing that Latino is an ethnicity, not a race. But I say that because we all benefit. And I'm sure that all of us have attained a certain level of success in part because of the diversity of that network, because your sponsors need to come from different backgrounds and different perspectives, and they're usually going to be people in power, and often they're people who don't look like us. But simultaneously, for leaders who are going to lead powerfully into the future, they need to be able to not only sponsor people who are different, they need to have peers and recognize that those peers can contribute a lot. At LinkedIn 2 years ago, we started a program called Bridge. And like most of us who've grown up either in the church or in very, community-oriented environments, the power of breaking bread can make a big difference. Our breaking bread through Bridge was effectively bringing leaders of color who are already senior executives to meet with our own executives. The idea being that being a white person should not be default for I have power and privilege and everyone else is junior to me, so I need to be their sponsors and mentors. But much like we've shared around the power of the PhD project, how are you creating relationships with peers? People who are equal to you, people who probably went to school with you and you just never knew them because your friends were different. And what we began to see was when we invited these folks into the room, surely enough, they went to the same schools and were graduating the same classes with some of our executives. And that conversation for there aren't people of color at this level goes away. The idea that there aren't accomplished executives and emerging executives evaporates when you're having conversations with people who are grappling with the same issues from a marketing context or an operations and finance context or legal. And so creating new networks begins to shift the ground, not only for how we view people of color as talent, it shifts the ground for who's in my network that I go to. So we started seeing leaders inviting Black and Latino folks to their offsites to be the keynote presenters for their teams because their teams had never worked for a person of color. They didn't know leaders of color of that stature. And it also shifted something else that was really powerful, which was this idea of equity also comes in what am I missing as a leader that I benefit from as a result of having access to these different perspectives and these different ways of operating. And what it creates that's so fundamental to this conversation is trust. Like if I don't know someone, it's highly likely that I'll not only fear what's different, I won't trust. And we begin to trust when we know, when we're familiar, when we can feel confident about the relationship. So creating new trust networks, creating new relationships with people different from ourselves, inviting them and just getting to know them as human beings and getting to know the work they do, it starts to shift the network, which shifts the mindset, which shifts the way we behave. And what we find is that we can be at ease. We can do things like invite different people to interview and consider opportunities in our organizations. And we can have greater diversity as our outcome, rather than this idea of when we've got a perfect environment, then I can invite people in. When I find the person who did the same job at my competitor, I can invite them in. That's not going to happen. Our competitors run with the same level of fear our companies have. So we've got to start by shifting our networks and having leaders, particularly white leaders in power, to recognize the absence of powerful people of color in their own networks. And when they do that, the game changes entirely.
Thank you. So we have only a few minutes left. Do a quick round robin of final thoughts. Like if there's one thing that you want to leave the audience with, what would that be? So Deb, I'll start with you.
I got two. I've got a quote,
Okay.
which we won't count as one, and then two. Disaggregate the data. Be comfortable with disaggregating the data. I'm the executive director of Advancing Black Pathways, not diverse pathways, not minority, underrepresented Black. It followed Advancing Black Leaders, and we've also launched Advancing Black Entrepreneurs. You be comfortable with the data, disaggregating the data so that you can say, these are the areas that we realize that we've got some runway, right, to get better. So that's really what I want to share. And of course, I want to say this. Deborah Lee, of course, amazing CEO of BET, and now has started her own organization, Monarchs Collective, and she's on 4 corporate boards, did Leading Women Defined. And Pia and I have been there. I met Dorothy Height, Dr. Dorothy Height there. And I remembered her saying that to a young woman, a young African-American woman had come up to her and she said, Dr. Height, I'm the first Black woman in my law firm. And Dr. Height said, that's nice, dear. Don't be the last. So I think that my quote is to say, don't be comfortable being, we've all been the first, but make certain you're not the only, and definitely not the last.
Thank you, Deb. Pia, final thoughts. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Okay, I was desperately trying to get there, and I know we're almost out of time. So I want to take it in a different direction, and I'll go fast, 30 seconds. Many of the women on this call come to work. We all come to work with our super capes on. And when you look closely, that cape is tattered. It's unraveling at the seams. And I just think we need to care for ourselves. We're taking care of everyone else, from our children, our parents, our spouses, our employees, but self-care is so important. So take care of self. And I always say you can't give your best if you're working with less. So thank you, Sasha.
Thank you, Pia. Dr. Tina.
Thank you. So I will circle back to a point I made about organizational will. And I think, again, I'm going to say within 6 to 12 months, we could have drastically different organizations if we approach diversity, equity, and inclusion like we do financial imperatives, for example. During the COVID pandemic, many organizations are saying, oh my goodness, we must figure out how to respond to this. Take that same kind of energy and say, we have got to figure out how to resolve these issues. You're trained strategists. DEI is about strategy and organizational climate. Talk about the organizational will that you have and figure out what are the obstacles and facilitators to enable that kind of shift in mindset.
Thank you. And Rosanna.
For those of us on the call who are people of color, I think really important for us to remember that we cannot allow the world to objectify us or define us. It goes back to where the conversation began, in fact. It's important for us to insert ourselves in the narrative and be a part of it. And for all of us on the call, it's really important to recognize and always remember we are never our circumstances. It gets really easy to look to the past and think that that defines the future. I would say the future is a creation. Our ability to create equity, our ability to create representation in the workforces that we're a part of, our ability to make different decisions happens because it's a choice, it's an intention. It doesn't happen because of the circumstances. Often it happens despite the circumstances. So let's not define ourselves by our circumstances.
Thank you. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining us. I told you all this was going to be a phenomenal panel. I know, get your screenshots in. But thank you all so much. Thank you, PhD Project, for bringing us together. Again, my name is Sasha Thompson, founder and CEO of The Equity Equation, and I will see you all next month for next month's panel discussion.
Yep. Thank you, Sasha, for wonderful moderating.
Yeah.
You are awesome. And ladies, it was a joy and a pleasure. I know we're going to keep this going. Love the chats.